person asked about different bugs in Selenium, so I've seen a lot of bugs, and yeah, that doesn't really encourage me to try to fix anything in there. So Atlassian Selenium, so that's the thing that we kind of built that sits on top of Webdriver, and it has there are 3 core APIs in it to help you build page objects and write kind of tests. And it's tested product, page binder, and page element. And yeah, I'm gonna go through that for a little bit of theory, and then I'm gonna show you an example how it actually looks. Although most of you have seen the WebDriver test and page objects, so most of you know how that looks in practice. But it's good to know what's the purpose behind them. So tested product is meant to kind of represent a single tested application. One of the things I've changed in the DVCS connector code was actually fixing that, because there is this thing called magic visitor there, which really means Bitbucket tested product, but I guess no one thought about adding a Bitbucket tested product, so I added one. So basically the core idea is it's a single tested application, so it lives under some URL, so that it encapsulates the URL that you can access the application at. So if you have Jira and Confluence running, and you're kind of automating them, or Jira and Bitbucket, as it is the case with DVCS connector, and then you're automating both as part of one test, you need tested products for both. And then it also, the other thing it does is it initializes WebDriver, and I guess important thing to know is a single instance of WebDriver corresponds always to a single browser process. So it kind of takes care under the cover that you don't try to initialize 5 different WebDriver instances, so you don't have 5 browsers running. At least not for, you can do that, but for most of our tests we don't want to do that. Yeah, the locate application under test is basically what I said already. It knows where the application is running. And then the third thing it's doing, it gives you the page binder, which I'm gonna talk about a little bit on the next slide, which basically is kind of like a small dependency injection framework with some extra kind of lifecycle handling that helps you kind of build and instantiate page objects a bit easier. And then I guess important thing to know is you may own it, or you may work with an existing implementation. So usually when you write a page objects library for your application, for your product, you will kind of export a tested product, and that's what Jira does. So there's Jira tested product, and that's what Fusion is mostly using in our at least tests that are covering our Jira plugins. So we don't have to have our own tested product in Fusion because we're already kind of inside another. Our stuff is inside another product.
So do we extend the tested product, or do we?
Not that I know of. Not Jira tested product.
So we just use the tested product.
Yeah. So pretty much. You can customize it. I'm not gonna cover that here. There is a repository that I started building. It's called Atlassian Selenium Samples, that tries to demonstrate how to use Atlassian Selenium, because there are a lot of APIs there that people probably don't know about. And one of them is actually you can, because tested product creates this whole dependency injection context, and you can actually kind of hook into it and add your own components to it. But it's not widely known. But so there is an option to customize it, but most of the time you don't really need it that much.
So the idea is that to get access to the page objects for a system, we use their tested product. We don't just use their page objects classes directly.
Yeah. So tested product is a bit more than page objects. It's access to the it creates the browser for you, or the WebDriver. It knows where the Jira is running, and then it gives you access to the page objects frame. But then the thing with page objects, you can build your own page objects and have the page binder from Jira tested product instantiated. That's not a problem. Yeah. But also you have usually with the whole page objects library, you have all the page objects that Jira has if you want to use them. I think we use them a little bit in Fusion, maybe. Like to go to the admin pages or whatever we have to do.
Very easy.
Yeah.
So does the product have like convenient methods or backdoors or things to say like turn on this dark feature or log in at that band?
Backdoors are Jira specific. Like the Jira backdoor is Jira specific. Like there's no concept of backdoor in Atlassian Selenium, but it can be a component of your dependency injection context. You can make it so, I guess. And I think that's what we did in Jira. I think you can kind of inject it into your page objects if you want. Sorry, in Fusion. The tested products. So often people implementing tested products. This tested product has only one method that allows you to navigate, which is called visit. So it allows you to go to any page that you want to. You can add more methods to it. Like often, I think Jira tested product has some methods to log in and go somewhere. But again, it's not like Atlassian Selenium doesn't enforce anything like that, I guess. But it's a common practice to have a login method on your tested product because it's supposed to be the entry point to your test. So you start your test and you start from tested product, you log in, go to some page and do some other stuff. Yeah. Okay. So page binder, that's the thing that represents your kind of dependency injection context that allows you to bind page objects. So it's really well, one thing it does is to navigate to URL, which is kind of you don't really have to use it directly. You can use the tested product method visit to do that. And the big thing that it allows, it has this bind method, which is basically allows you to create page objects and do some extra stuff with it. So the way the life cycle of when you do bind, what happens is the page object is instantiated. Then if it has any of the injected fields annotated with inject, it will inject dependencies as Spring or Juice would do. Then it will run through something called post-injection processors. I don't think we'll have time to go into details about it. But for example, if you've seen element by in your page objects, so like you can inject page elements, that's how it happens. There's a post-injection processor that takes your page object and processes those annotations to inject page elements into your page objects. And then it runs through a life cycle. There are 3 life cycle methods that are actually, I don't find them that useful except for wait until. There's one method, wait until, that's pretty useful. And I guess the examples that I'm going to show you later, I'll probably explain when it's useful to use wait until and when it's not too good to use it. So really what I like most about it is really just like almost like dependency injection framework. So if you have any like stuff that you need to inject into your page objects or any page elements that you need to inject, it makes it much easier, like much less boilerplate than just having to do it yourself. And then the third thing is page element. So Webdriver has this concept of web element, and that's basically Webdriver's API for accessing the DOM, so accessing different parts of your page. The problem with web element, the first problem is you cannot, like if you try to search for something that doesn't exist, it will just throw exception. If you have a web element and it stopped existing because it was removed from the page, or stopped existing and then was added again, the same thing, saved by ID, it will give you stale reference exception. So it just throws a lot of exceptions. That's the problem with it. So the page element kind of alleviates that problem by wrapping a web element and then giving you, instead of saying, oh, I don't exist, so I will just throw exception, it will give you an isPresent method, which basically you can use to ask whether the element is present or not. And then when you try to actually invoke an action, like if you try to click or type into page element that doesn't exist, then it will throw exception because there is nothing, I guess, more reasonable to do than just throw exception. but you have an option to check whether it exists before, so you don't have to write your code and then catch exceptions on everything you write. The other thing what it has is a timed version, so that you have a method time that returns a timed version of page element, which means pretty much for every query that you have on the page element, where by query I mean, and if you ask about the state of the element, like what's its tag name, whether it has any attribute, whether it has any class, whether it has whether it's checked, selected, or whatever else, whether it's present, whether it's visible. You have a timed version of it, so it's like a special API that allows you to execute assertions with timeouts. And assertions with timeouts are very important, and I'm gonna cover that a bit later because we're gonna go through race conditions in Webdriver tests and how to prevent them. And then the third thing page element does is it has actually, that's probably not very widely known, but it has a couple of extensions like checkbox element, select element, and multi-select element, which kind of represent the more specialized elements on your page. So you can, so if you have a checkbox, you can actually use checkbox element to help you kind of manipulate it or represent it. Any questions? Okay, and page objects. So we're gonna go through that. That's a couple of slides, and then there's an example. I think I'll kind of try to show everything I talked about in a code sample. First of all, why we write page objects? I guess it's just applying like the common object-oriented principles to your tests. So before I start, like maybe let's just say, because many people, I think there is this assumption that test code is not as important as production code, and it doesn't have to be like as high quality as production code. So I always challenge that assumption, and I think your test code, especially in complex tests like Webdriver tests, you really want to strive to keep your code clean, readable, maintainable, easy to understand, and so on and so on. So you don't want brittleness. You want to keep the quality as high as your production code, because you're going to spend a lot of time probably fixing those tests and maintaining them. So I think that's the first assumption here. So when you start from that assumption, then writing page objects like representing your tested domain in some better way than test macros that just go through low-level APIs and just click and assert from states, just using low-level like web element APIs. Then it's like writing page objects is suddenly kind of the natural thing to do. So abstract away the application, the domain you're testing, so it also allows you to reuse it. You don't have to repeat yourself in tests. So if something breaks or something is changed, you don't have to change it in 50 places suddenly. And believe me, that's how tests used to be written in Atlassian. Like back in the days, something changed in Jira in 2010. I remember, and I was going for 50 tests because one ID changed, and I had to change 50 tests basically to accommodate for the fact that one ID has changed on the page. So I guess there is not much to I think to explain about why we're doing that. And I think the most important part that's maybe not clear to people is what should be in page objects and what should be in tests. So page objects basically represent your pages of your HTML pages of your application and some parts of thereof. So it doesn't mean that the page object does have to represent the page, because I'm going to talk a little bit about it later, but basically these days our pages are very complex. Like they have so many parts: footers, headers, sidebars, dialogues, menus, navigation bars, and whatnot. So trying to represent that in one page would be, again, probably repeating yourself a lot. So that's why you take smaller parts of the page, smaller components, and try to represent them by separate page objects, which you can then reuse in different tests. And then two most important parts, really, all your public API in page objects should be one of those, queries or actions. So query is basically what's the current state of my page object, or the part of the page that the page object represents. So for example, like, I don't know, I just took some random example, commit detail dialog. In Fusion tests, it has get repo names. So basically, it's obvious example of a query, like, what's the repo names that, the repository names that I currently display. And then actions is basically everything that changes the state. So on web pages, it will usually boil down to either clicking something, typing into something, submitting something, yeah, maybe pressing a shortcut. That's pretty much what it boils down to, but then it on the higher level it may mean different things, like submitting a form, filling up a form, I don't know, clicking next, going to the next page, or closing a dialog, opening a dialog, opening a drop-down, and all sorts of stuff. So that's your actions.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So that action, click, create, review, is that a good name?
No, it's not. But that's what it was. But I'm gonna talk about it a bit later. Yeah, I chose a bad example, I guess. But it was just an example of an action, I guess. Yeah. And then, so what tests are supposed to do? Well, the same. What you're like, if you look at your unit test, what they're doing is setting up some state. So they're making some assumptions, then they execute the one particular method under test, and then they verify results. So with WebDriver tests, ideally it's the same. So going through some page or some part of the page, setting up the state, say opening a dialog, typing in something, and getting to the state, like executing a number of actions to get to the state that you get the page to the state that you want it to be, like that you assume to be, and then assert that this state actually happened. And so use page object actions to drive the test, and then at the end use the queries to verify your assumptions, to execute assertions. That's all there is to it. So that will hopefully, like, if you next time you think about building a page object, think about, like, if you see a public method in page objects, always think about, is it a query, is it an action? If not, then what is it? What is it doing there? And then in your test, the same. If you see a test, try to break it down into, leading up, building the state that you want to be at, and then asserting where that state. It gets a bit tricky, especially with the tests, because, as you know, they often kind of expensive. At least the way we do them often is expensive, because you have to like restore, for example, data before every test. So we kind of tend to squeeze in more stuff into one test case that a unit test perhaps would have. So I guess it's just a matter of finding a trade-off between, a 200-line test that does everything, and say a 10 nicely breakdown test that really tests for distinct things. So sometimes it's okay to have to do maybe two different things in your tests, or to drive the test to some state, execute some assertion, and then, since you're already here, maybe perform another action and execute another assertion or something like that. But there is a balance between, readable, well-designed test and the 200-line macro that just does everything.
With the sequence you described with each test of setting things up and then doing the action and then doing the assertions, would you recommend that at the end of the setup you assert that you're actually where you're expected to be before you actually do the action? Or
yeah, well, I guess with the setup, what I meant is depends really on your setup. Like if you're often in WebDriver tests, I think we have a common setup for all the tests, which is happening before WebDriver test. If you have any data to set up before WebDriver test that's specific to the test, I don't know. For example, in generally I recommend, like if you have any data that's not part of the test, but you need it there, I would recommend using some kind of backdoors to do that rather than using actually Webdriver to create that setup. Is that what you mean? Or
I mean, like, say you want to go to a certain page, so you might navigate a sequence of pages to get there.
Yeah.
And then you want to test that something on that page behaves in a certain way. Would you, before you did that action, would you have a final assertion to say, am I really on the page that I thought I'd gone to?
Oh yeah, that's for sure. But then
before you do the action,
I guess that's the one assertion that I will talk about it. Like am I really on that page? That's what I would put in the page. So like if you have this wait until annotation, which is really an assertion. So if you're going to a page, where I would always put in like a wait until method. I think all the Jira pages have it, even like an abstract method to do it, and then it will check already for you whether you're on the page that you want it to be at. I don't know about any others like. Otherwise, I think yeah, if you're like opening a dialog, that's another thing. Like so, there's a bit of a trade-off where like sometimes in your page object actions, you would put in like if you know that this action can only have one outcome, you would put an assertion there because that makes it a bit easier and less cluttered in the test if you have to have instead of having like very low level of I open this dialog and now check whether the dialog is open. Like if you have a method in your page object to open some dialog, for example, and you know that after clicking this freaking button it has to be open, and you just you can wait until the dialog is open inside page object. So that reduces a bit of that reduces the number of assertions you need in your test. But again, it's fair to have like a couple of actions. I got somewhere, and now I should see this row here. So you can assert, is this row here? And then you can click, say, edit to open some edit dialog for this particular row, and then again assert, does this, or fill up this dialog and submit, and then again assert, does this row have the updated data and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be action, 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 assertion. It could be like action, action, assertion, action, action, assertion. It's a bit of a trade-off there. Okay, any questions about page objects versus tests? Okay. So now building blocks of page objects. So it's really like I already said, talked about queries and actions. So that's the public API. So everything that's public in your page objects should probably be some of those too. But then there's how you actually implement page objects is I guess there's a bit more to it. So obviously page elements are the main building block, because what page object really is encapsulating a part of your part of the DOM of your page. So you want page elements that represents those parts. But important thing is they should be internal. The clients of your API of your page object don't need to care and shouldn't care about what page elements are inside, because they may change over time and you don't want others to have access to that. I guess, well, okay, I'm going to talk about it later. But yeah, generally don't expose your page elements. And then you have other framework components. So the two main ones I talked about is tested product and page binder. You will often need page binder. You will often need both of them, or mostly page binder in your page objects to do stuff. There are also other framework components that are available in Atlassian Selenium out of the box, which I'm gonna cover maybe during the workshop or during the first example I'm gonna show. And also you can add your own components, like for example in Fusion, like the backdoor, Jira backdoor or whatever else is something product specific that was added. So like Jira tested product adds a lot of Jira specific stuff to all the components in the framework. Then you can have lifecycle methods that I already mentioned. There are 3 of them. Basically you just annotate, it's kind of like Spring pre-destroy or post-construct. So you just annotate a public void method without arguments with one of those three, and it's gonna get invoked after the page object has been created. Again, I think wait until is the most useful. Validate state is kind of like a historical legacy that I don't want to even explain why it's there. Well, it's there basically for page objects because we used to use web elements in page objects, and then you couldn't inject your web elements, or you couldn't create web elements if you weren't sure that the element is actually there on the page or on the page objects you created. So you had to first. So the validate state the idea was, oh, I'm gonna check whether this particular thing that the web element I want to instantiate is actually present, because otherwise it will throw exception. So that's why validate state is there, but I don't recommend using it. And then init has some limit usage. I actually have an example in the Atlassian Selenium samples of where it could be useful, so I'm going to show it a bit later. Yeah, and that's it pretty much. And then you can obviously you can have some protected private methods to, I don't know, dynamically find some page elements or do whatever you want. But then the last two, queries and actions, is really the only public API you should have. And I already talked a little bit about actions. It's a good practice to not be void and just return the resulting page object. Like if you open a dialog, then return the dialog. If you open a dropdown, then return the dropdown. If you go to submit the page and go to another page, then return the instance of that other page, and so on. If it's just an action modifying the page object itself, I always return kind of itself, because it just makes it easier for chaining, but other people have different opinions about it, so whatever works for you. And then, again, as I mentioned, it's okay to assert. It's one of the places where it's okay to put assertions, but only if there is one specific outcome. For example, a bad example of assertion is when we have a method to submit a form, or to click add something or whatever, and then if there is any error condition that could cause the form to actually not submit, or I don't know, the dialog not to close instead of return to you with an error, then if you have an assertion that the dialog will close after submitting, you basically cannot use that method to test for error conditions, because you will try to close the dialog, and then it will return with an error, and then you will try to assert that it's actually closed, and your test breaks. So that's an example where you have multiple possible outcomes of your action, and you don't want to assert for any specific one of them. Any questions about that?
With the returning the resulting page object.
Yep.
What page objects will be kept inside as private, won't they? Inside the sorry, not the page object.
Page elements.
Page
yeah,
elements.
you don't want to return page element. You want to return a page object.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, and you can do that using page binder. Yeah, I have a lot of examples in the examples, so you'll see what I'm talking about. Hierarchy, again, I talked about it a little bit. Our web pages are pretty complex. The good thing about HTML is it's hierarchical structure, so you can so basically you can reflect that with objects pretty well. So you have like the parent of parents, which is the page, and then it has some components like header, footer, sidebar, and each of those components encapsulates part of your tested page, and then those components again can have some inside components. Like a header could have a drop down and some links to open some other stuff, and so on. So do you use that to like try to break down your page objects into reasonably small components, not too small, like having a page object for a link doesn't make much sense, but having a page object for a header, which is a collection of links plus some toolbar or something, it's a good idea. And this is complicated. Well, it's not that complicated, but I guess most of your page objects if you come back to this slide, I didn't actually mention another building block that you could have is just an instance variable of something else than that. And that instance variable has to be passed in the constructor to the page object. And there's two main cases for that. The first case, I guess, is, well, and I'm calling, let's just be clear about the vocabulary I'm using. I'm calling those like stateful, as in stateful page objects would have this variable that's not anything that you injected, so not a framework component, not a page element you injected. So like in pure terms, all page objects are stateful because they have some variables in them. But I'm talking about the variables that you have to pass through the constructor when instantiating the page object, rather than injecting it from the framework. So that's what I understand by stateful in this case. So the easy example is, again, all the components on your page, they don't represent the whole page. They usually operate within a context of a specific component, and that's basically what you will have to often pass to that page object. For example, imagine a table with rows. Every row has some information and maybe some actions like edit or delete and so on, like an editable table. It's a common practice to represent each row as a separate page object, and then that page object needs an access to the page element that's container of the whole thing. So from there it can find different elements, page elements within that row to query, to build the queries and actions that it provides. So basically that's some sort of stateful page object where you have to pass the container page element to it when you instantiate. And there's a lot of examples of that, and I will show even the example that we're gonna have in DVCS connector is a pretty good example of that. The other common case for that is where you have, like, actually, unfortunately, I don't have an example today because I haven't managed to find one or to create one. But I guess the most common theoretical example is a view issue page in Jira. So it's a page that it's a page, but it represents a specific entity in your application. In this case, a specific issue, and that issue is identifiable by issue key or issue ID. So, and that thing is also encoded in the URL. In this case, issue key is encoded in the URL that leads you to that page. So that's where you need, or you want to have a stateful page. So you want the page, the view issue page that implements that or represents that page. You want it to know the issue key that you're that it kind of that it represents. For one, it needs to know it because every page needs to provide the URL to go to. So if you want to go to that page, it needs to build the URL using the issue key. And secondly, it just needs to know if you went to that page. It also needs to verify, oh, actually I arrived at the page that I wanted to go. So that's an example where you have to pass in the issue key upfront to the page object representing the view issue page for it to work, and that's some sort of state that the page object needs to know upfront. So usually it will happen if you have a page that represents some sort of entity in your application. Like in Confluence, it would be any blog or any wiki page would probably have an ID or whatever they use to access that page. In Stash, it would be a repository page. You need project key and repository Slack to go to repository page, and so on. And I guess my recommendation is just don't worry about the state unless you think you need to. So use stateless by default. Obviously, for component page objects, you'll see it's kind of natural. You'll be like, okay, this dialog encapsulates this part of this whole div is the container, so let's use the container as the that page element is the like thing that I have to pass to the dialog. So I think that should be pretty easy to figure out where to use kind of stateless versus stateful. But generally, don't try to pass in too much state to your page object. Just be conservative and think about those two main use cases that I mentioned here. Any questions? Okay, example. Let's show an example of all that stuff that I talked about, and then we'll have a break. Where is my mouse? Okay, so what I have, that's the Atlassian Selenium samples. It's still kind of under construction, so don't be scared by all the to-dos it has. I'll just show you what I'm actually trying to, like what I'm trying to model here. So it's just, oh, you don't see it. So it's just a page like that, like a kind of typical AUI page. Has some header and navigation bar and title and shit like that. So that's where's my mouse again? Damn it. So that's an example of a page that would kind of model that page. So just let's go through the structure. This is obviously the building blocks, the page elements. I can inject them using the element by, which you've probably seen a lot. As you can see, I'm mostly using IDs. That's probably the most reliable way to kind of locate your elements on the page. It's not always feasible to use IDs, but if you can for like the big parts of the page, like headers, footers, I think it's perfectly fine. And then here is an example of a framework component I'm injecting, which is page binder. And then one difference between page object representing pages versus any other page object is they have to implement this very sophisticated interface that gives you URL to the page. The URL, as you probably know, is always relative because your tested product takes care of appending the actual base URL of the application to it. And then this is an example of lifecycle method. As I said, for pages, it's a good idea to have one. In my case, I applied some of the principles I'm going to talk about later, and maybe I will upset some purists, but where is the pointer? What the hell? As you can see, I added this funny attribute here, and basically I'm just asserting here that this attribute is present. So that kind of tells me, oh, I'm on the page that I meant to go to.
Sorry, Darius, should the element by fields,
Yep.
should they normally be protected? Is there a reason that they're not private?
Yeah, I talked. Well, it's not a big deal, but I think so. For example, for Fusion, it doesn't make probably. It's not a big deal at all. But like, if you're developing product page objects and you think plugin developers will be using them, or other people will be using them, it's nice to give them access to all the internals, so they can. So if they ever need to extend your page object. Sometimes, for example, you didn't provide, like you build your page objects for yourself, right? Like in Jira, they build page objects because they want to test Jira, but then also the page objects are being exported as a library and used by other people, like Fusion. So if they don't provide, I don't know, a method to do something with your page object that you need in the plugin, for example, then it's nice to be able to extend their page. Like extension, I guess, is the like subclassing in Java is the only mechanism you can kind of do that with, which is not perfect, but it's there and you can use it. And so theoretically you could extend that page and add the stuff you need, and if you are given access to all the internals that are not public but are building blocks of the page, it just makes your job easier. So that's the motivation behind making everything protected. It won't harm anyone. It can make someone's life a bit easier if they need to build like an extension or modification of your page.
That first element by attribute.
Yeah.
So if that tag name matches multiple tags, what's the semantics? Do you get the first one, the last one?
You will get the first one, but hopefully there is no two bodies in the.
True. I mean, not body, but
yeah, you'll get the first one.
and if you want to match all elements that match a certain condition, do you get an array or a list or something like that at page elements?
You can inject an iterable, and it will give you all. Like if you do this, then it will give you all elements with that ID.
We should have a duplicated is already.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Use
same.
the
Like
class,
if I
use
try
class,
to iterate
class
here,
name.
iterable here,
Yep.
but it will. I'm also working on a better search API for page elements, which hopefully will be coming soon. Because I'm actually not like I don't use that stuff. The element by I only use for like big static parts of pages, but often if you have dynamic page objects like dialogues and stuff like that, I don't use the element by that much, because yeah, it allows you for like very simple locators like by something and maybe a list of something, but it often like some of the cases where you have a table and you have a header, and you wanna find all the rows except for the header. Then your rows maybe would have a CSS class that will identify them as rows, and you would have to find all by tr, by tag name tr, and then filter by something, and then maybe again within those find something. So I'm working on a search API that will allow you to be much more flexible. But then what I do normally is have a protected method that gives you a list of page element or a specific page element, and within that use the search API kind of. Yeah.
This injection will happen after wait until?
No. Good question. No, it will. So first it will be instantiated. Then this. Where is my? Oh, Jesus. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Why I can't see it?
If you mirror your screen, you should be able to see it on your whiteboard as well.
Yeah. Okay. Let's mirror. Yeah, we're here, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So okay. So then the instantiate the page object, then this will get run. So all the injections of stuff, and then the post injection processes will run. So anything like this, and then the other annotation you can support. Like I won't have time to show you how to write a post injection processor yourself, but you can actually write one. So and support any annotation you want in your page object. And then wait until, actually I have a demo here even, why talk about it if I can demonstrate. Yeah, except it's very small. Oh. Anyone knows how to make it bigger? Like what bigger? Can you read that part? Probably not. Yay! Good eye. Yeah. So basically, that's what I was talking about. Wait until, then validate state, then init. But really, validate state and init you won't use too much. So what's important? Constructor, then injections, then post-injection processors, and then wait until. That's the order.
So
Yep.
wait until is executed after injection of the elements, right?
Yeah.
So if I wanted to inject element after one element to appear, for example, if the element depends on is inside the data page ID.
Inside body, you mean? Or
Yeah. No, I mean if this wait until wait for adel and I'm looking for element inside.
well, again, you don't have to wait to. Well, okay. So you wanna search within something. That's what it.
Yes.
That's not gonna be present straight away.
Yes.
What I would normally do is don't worry about life cycle. Just do this.
Yeah. Get it and wait.
Live coding skills, not high. Like this. And then you can use that method anywhere you want. And then, so like instantiating page elements or finding them, it's cheap. You don't have to worry about, repeating that operation. Like it's actually, I find it like.
So what are the benefits of using the field with the injection versus getting
Boilerplate, I guess. Saving boilerplate. But again, I tend to use a lot of just like kind of live searching rather than injecting upfront.
So when you inject fields,
And also, it gets a bit tricky with tables, especially dynamic tables. The problem with that's gonna be maybe fixed in the future, but like the problem with tables is if you inject a list of page elements, say, how to explain it best? Maybe I will say that if you have a list of page elements, you're better off every time when you kind of return a list of, say, page object that model them, just get a fresh list of them.
let's get it.
Because if you're getting a list, what page element only remembers is, oh, I'm in a page element and my parent is this, and I'm at position 3. And then if they get reordered, then the page element that previously represented, something that was at position 3 and something else is now at position 3, it will suddenly represent that other thing. So it's kind of it's more intuitive to just get a new list. There's no other way to. And we did that thing that tries to be kind of simulating and making impression that it's actually like gonna work, but there are corner cases where it can be very confusing. Like you like don't like keep an instance of page element that's part of a list, I guess, in your page object for too long, I guess. If you know that the list may change. If it's like a static table, like a list of links, then it's fine. But yeah, you have to be careful with that, I guess.
So the actual implementation of wait until is cooler or
How does it work?
Yes.
Yeah, it pulls every. So there is this magic file that maybe you've seen or maybe not. Jesus. So this guy controls how it works. This guy is the evaluation interval, which really means how often it's gonna poll for the state. And all of the other ones, it's just mapping the timeouts. You see that timeout type thing that you often see, it's mapping them to actual numbers. So you can kind of reconfigure that to suit your environment, I guess. But yeah, it's basically polling every 200 milliseconds. Or like by default every 100 milliseconds to check whether the state you want it to be has happened or not. yeah, so there is an interface that, so many questions. So there's this, it's a, it's a framework, no, it's just like, I don't know if we're gonna have a lot of the workshop, but this thing is one of the framework components. You can inject what?
So I'll shut up now.
No, yeah. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's good. No, it's good. It's good. I won't have to do the workshop. I'll actually do it. So this guy, you can inject it as page binder, and it has 6 methods. It's like this. It's all finding elements, and then every page element implements that thing. So that's why I can go in here and. Oh, did I remove my awesome method already? Let's say by something. So and then it's gonna search within that page element. And then there is also you can do this. And that will be the global page finder. So it will search for the whole page. And then I'm working on a more, like, that's I think the most problematic part of, like, the search APIs are not, like, for many cases where you have to do a bit more complicated search with filtering out and shit like that. I'm kind of adding a new API to the Dozen Selenium to make it much easier. But currently that's the thing you can use. So it's kind of equivalent to element by. So like element by ID will be equivalent to find by ID something. And also an important thing, if this can implement page element finder. Actually, let me show you. So I have already this guy. It implements page element finder, as you can see. And the way it implements it is delegating to the container. So that's the component that I was talking about. It's like an abstract implementation of a page object that is a part of your page. And it uses the container to actually delegate it to search. And then if you use element by inside that guy who implements page element finder, the injections will happen in the context of that container rather than the whole page. So if you have a simple page and you use element by, that will search throughout the whole page, but if it implements page element finder, that would search inside that page element finder, if that makes sense. Any more questions? Oh no, I'm serious.
So this element by annotation.
Yep.
Is waiting for the element?
No, it's not waiting because, as I said,